what does it actually cost you to build a passive property portfolio over 30 years with only buying 3 properties? Hi, I'm Jaryd Krause, the co-host of Property Pals Australia.
And I'm Sam Powell. And in this episode, we get to break down some numbers, talking about the standard Australian property buyer where they buy their principal as a residence, pay it down over 30 years. What's the opportunity cost if you look to invest as well over that 30-year period? And there's a pretty hefty number at the end of it that we discuss. We run through the inputs in this episode because it's a beast of an episode. Obviously, we had to do 2 parts. So obviously, there's a lot in it. We talk about a bit of mindset, also just the Australian standard psyche, don't we, Jaryd?
Yeah, renovations, like how much renovations can end up costing you, and does it actually add value to your property overall? And then we move into part 2. Part 2 is mostly about us sharing what's your net position in after all of that, and that just being a very passive investment strategy. So stay tuned for number 2. Let's dive into number 1 for now.
Welcome to Property Pals, the podcast where we share everything around how to build a property portfolio, from researching areas, financing, structuring, buying, selling, and reinvesting to live a life of financial independence. As a disclaimer, any information shared by myself, Jaryd, Sam, and the Property Pals team is strictly general and should not be taken as constituting professional advice. You should consider seeking independent legal, financial, and taxation advice from a qualified professional.
Samuel, this is going to be a big one. Probably 2 parts for everybody listening. Some comparisons. You've run some models, and we're going to talk whether we should just buy one primary place of residence and see how that builds our wealth versus some other strategies.
Yeah. Well, basically, what I've come to realize is people don't really have grasp the depth of the power of compound interest in property and investing, and sometimes it gets a bit overwhelming. So I thought I'd really simplify it to help model out a few different scenarios, because it ends up being over $2.5 million in difference over a 30-year period, just by taking a few simple actions. Which, when you're looking at retirement, that $2.5 million plus can essentially change your life, right? Like they don't teach you this stuff in school. I know we sort of bang on about it, and that's probably the passion behind the pod, is that there's not enough education and knowledge out there. And I just wanted to share a few different models. Like that strategist side of me had a lot of sort of requests, so I thought let's give it a crack and do a bit of justice with a few detailed analysis.
Yeah, when you're thinking about retirement as well, I think about my parents in retirement, other people in retirement, my aunties, uncles, my parents talking about other people who are retiring at the same time, and just that each other's financial situation. And it's funny how good they are at talking about their financial situation without an ego, and telling each other where they're at, how much super they do or don't have. And they're just cool with it. But when we're younger, we don't really, it's a bit more taboo. And I think that's BS. I think we should really be like, let's discuss this so we can maybe have 2.5 mil at retirement. And 2.5 mil at retirement is what? It's going to be 125 grand a year at 5% interest. So if you've got a 5%, term deposit, you've got 2.5 in there, you're making 120, you're paying yourself 125, which is, you can live off that very, very well as a retiree.
Yeah, and you make a good point, actually. I love how we riff these things. Money, religion, and politics was how I was always like, we don't talk about money or religion or politics, because it's just, you get too many people offside. And it is, how can I say it? In my mind, it's like people don't talk about it, but then by not talking about it, you're not actually understanding and comparing. And not that you compare yourself to others, because there's so many different elements to it, but it's good to understand somewhat of a benchmark and to talk about it, because I mean, we all get so swept up in our own day-to-day lives, and they go pretty quickly.
They do.
And it's a lot easier if you start early. So, employing people to start early, aren't we?
Yeah, absolutely. Start in the property game early, because that's where you can get 2.5 mils. I mean, that's just one model, one example. So let's dive into some models, Sam. Let's do the comparisons.
Yeah, so basically two scenarios around. So the first one is keeping it real simple, right? It's just you save $100,000, which is pretty standard in today's dollars. I know you can get there in different ways, right? But $100,000 is pretty much where I see a good cash savings rate.
To start investing in property.
To start, or even just to buy property, like I went to $115,000 just to account for, generally with principal place of residence, there's obviously purchasing costs. You probably wouldn't have too much in regards to stamp duty with the $500,000 budget, but I like to sort of overestimate as much as I can just to factor it all in. But scenario one, really simple: purchasing a property and paying it off over a 30-year period. That's pretty much it. So you're buying it, $500,000 is what you pay for it. And you get a principal and interest loan, and you just pay it off over 30 years. And whatever the spare cash you have, you just have a reasonable, chilled life. Go and do things.
It's not trying to pay it down fast. You're just using the 30 years to pay it off, and then you obviously not all your money's going to pay off the debt. You're going to use it for living expenses and travel and whatnot. So, okay, that's a pretty basic bitch version.
It's the standard Australian property owner, really. And that's why I modeled it that way. Yes, $500,000 is a little bit sort of cheap on the cheap side if you're listening to this. Most capital cities around the world, but there are $500,000 houses out there, and had to pick a number, so I went with 500. Obviously, the larger the purchase price, the more the compounding effect. I get it, but simplistic reasons: $500,000, paying it principal and interest, 30-year period. 6% interest rate is where we went, and a growth rate of 6% per annum on the property, which is your pretty standard 5 to 6% per annum is the Australian average over a 30-year period. So based on that, I try to keep it at an 80% loan to value ratio for both. I did keep it at 80% loan to value ratio for both scenarios because, no LMI. Obviously, we've talked about it in the pod before. Is don't be afraid of lenders' mortgage insurance, LMI. It helps you buy a bigger asset, and it gets amortized into the loan, so you don't really see it. But once again, keep it simple. So that's that model one. So basically model it full out. The second model is exactly the same as the first, but in year 5, so we're working in 2025 at the moment. So in 2030, you're buying a $500,000 investment property and using the equity out of the principal place of residence.
Yeah, so you buy a $500K PPOR, and then you take equity out in 5 years' time to buy another. How much is it? $500K property.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. And now the difference in there's a few little elements, but that's pretty much the strategy. So you're using the equity. You're still keeping, you're pulling that equity from your principal place of residence initially. So you're pulling out $125,000 in equity because it's a $100,000 deposit to keep that 80% loan to value ratio plus purchasing costs of 5%. That's stamp duty, legal, buyer's agent fees if they fit all in that.
Mm-hmm.
But that is the first investment purchase, and then it's exactly the same in year 10. So in 2035, you're buying another $500,000 property, same loan to value ratio. But you're pulling the equity out of your investment property this time because you want to be pulling equity out of your investment property.
How much equity are you pulling out of this one? Same?
Same amount, $125,000. So $100,000 for the deposit, $25,000 for purchasing cost.
Yep. Okay. So that's 10 years, 10-year strategy. You got 3 properties.
10-year accumulation strategy. Yep.
Yeah.
And now the disclaimer as always, this is just a model, general advice only. Seek knowledge from your accountant and model it out and everything yourselves. But good way to sort of run some pretty basic figures to get your head around it. And most people sitting there going, oh, wow, it's only 3 properties. And it is only 3 properties. One that you live in, 2 investments.
Yep.
The difference that I also factored into is, we put inflation rate at 3%. That's a standard CPI rate, Consumer Price Index, so acronyms. And the holding costs are different for investment compared to owner-occupier, obviously. The Australian average, just for a little, throw some stats at you, but they sit at 0.5% to 1.5% of the property's value is a rough sort of guide for holding costs. And
for investment or for
both. So what I modeled out is a 0.8% holding cost for owner-occupier, and 1.5% for investment.
And what are those holding costs made up of? Like, we're just talking about like rates and
rates, water, insurance, maintenance, and property management.
It doesn't include a renovation for your PPOR, does it? So this is the funny thing, is like, these are models, and then people get stuck into a model and take one of these courses of action. They buy the PPOR. I was like, I want it to look like this. Let's do the kitchen, let's do the thing. And you're like, well, you can do it. You can, but yeah, we'll come back to that shiny object syndrome. And
welcome to the
maybe
world
it's not
of
shiny objects, but like that's just the way the world is. Like, people want a nicer place to live in.
Yeah, well, that's the whole thing about strategy too. And like, you ran so many different strategies for people over the years, and it's just come back to me like where it's like your life changes every 12 months.
Yes.
Drastically with your thought process. So your plan's always changing, and you can sit there and go, what if this? What if I do a renovation? What if I buy investment property? What if I buy a commercial? What if I go overseas and rent out my PPOR? Like, there's so many what ifs that, that's just analysis paralysis. It's always brings it back to, let's make sure that this purchase is going to set you up for success for a potential purchase down the line. For principal place of residence, that's why my general strategy is always don't max out your purchasing capacity on your principal place of residence first up, because you're shooting yourself in the foot.
Yeah.
And then with investment, it's always, you got to focus on capital growth and also cash flow to help you keep growing the portfolio over time.
So to finish off these models, is there still more to go in scenario 2, or is it just a 10-year strategy and you buy 2 properties?
Yeah, it's just a 10-year accumulation, and then
2 investment properties, 3 properties,
and then 20 years of holding, essentially. And like with the strategy 2, same thing. So it's principal and interest repayment, but the investment properties are interest only. So I put the holding cost a little bit higher. Now you see that with investments, obviously you get tax deductions, depreciation. So you do get that net position starts to compound over time, which is pretty exciting.
Absolutely.
So it's pretty much 2 models. So to give it a quick little summary, just because it's all numbers and stuff, it's scenario 1, you're buying a $500,000 property and you're paying it off over 30 years, principal and interest, to be debt free and factoring in inflation, all that. Scenario 2,
debt free in 30 years. Yeah.
Yeah. Scenario 2 is exactly the same. You won't be debt free though, because you'll have 2 investment properties on top of your principal place of residence, paying interest only. And the rent rate for those, I just put it, $500,000 purchase, $500 a week rent. So it sits around that 5% yield perspective. That's pretty much it. Pretty simple stuff, but it's powerful in the back end.
Yeah. And so what was the main reason you want to run these scenarios and share them with people?
A lot of people get fixated on, I just want to pay down my mortgage first.
Okay.
And then it'll give me time to think and to breathe. And I get it. However, what people do is they pay down the mortgage, and if you're not paying it down drastically fast, which majority of people don't, then you're foregoing that, I guess, compounding effect of time. So that's why I'm always a bit of an advocate of get invested. So make your money work for you, so you don't have to work for your money. And there's a lot of, I guess, businesses that I talk to that, and people that don't really understand the numbers behind it and the difference it can have on their life. And you can talk about numbers face to face, but without sort of modeling out and showing real figures, it gets lost in translation, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I think about paying off a mortgage, it goes against everything that I've learned in investing. When we first started this, before we even started chatting property, I'd bought a property, right? Yep. And I had read the book, The Debt Millionaire, and just showcases that debt on good assets that appreciate over time as the economy and inflation goes up and changes, it only helps you build your wealth. And debt is actually your friend in that case. So paying off the debt can work against you in terms of building your wealth. It's the opposite, I think, of what most people have been led to believe or conditioned into. It's really good for the bank for you to just keep paying off your debt and them getting your money and then giving another loan to somebody else and making them wealthy. Why don't you not pay off as much of your debt and then have the bank give you a loan with your money that you kept in equity?
Yeah, well, this is the issue of education, finance education. I've been too busy reading finance books my whole life, and traveling the world. That's it really smacks you in the face once you actually get in on the property ladder, like the actual power of it, because you can see in real time, and you're tracking it in real time because you just sit there stoked that your properties are where they are 5 years later, essentially. This is the biggest thing. People that probably listen to this are obviously more finance orientated. They're interested. I want to try and get it out to the world, whereas it's the passion, Jaryd. The world, in my eyes, is set up for us to stay in the hamster wheel and to fail. Like it's structured by, I guess, different people in a way to not allow you to take a more like financial freeing path, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, unwealthy and unhealthy people make the economy more money.
Yeah,
and they pay more taxes, pay more in healthcare. In the health services, I should say, maybe not healthcare, but it's unfortunate, and I just think, to buy a 500K, I mean, you could run this model in different ways. Maybe you do buy a 700K home, or a 750K or 800K home, and you keep the debt on it and you pay interest on it. I've got a friend, Ray, who has a place that he lives in. He bought it and he's just paying interest only and lives in it. It's a primary place of residence. And the reason he pays interest only is because he can save more money for another deposit and buy and put that money to better use than paying down his debt, than paying down the principal. So he's gone away and bought multiple properties by living in somewhere that's interest only. Now, did he go and buy something that's a 95% LVR for his PPOR? No, of course not. But so it's not a scary thing for him to just be on interest only, but he's using leverage to his advantage. And I think for somebody, there's so many different scenarios and models that you can run from this. If the bigger the home that you buy to start off with, the slower you're going to grow your wealth in terms of being able to take equity out and then buy another one faster.
Yeah, so let's double down on that as to why. Because people sort of don't really. I feel that they don't really understand it. And if you're with greater income through like with an investment property, you've got rent coming through, so you've got another income source, and obviously you probably go into the negative initially, but after generally 5 years or so, they go into that positive territory.
Yeah.
And with more income, it allows you to borrow more money, and then it's the compounding effects of, if you can borrow more money, then you can buy an asset that appreciates in value, and it compounds faster. So instead of controlling a $1 million asset that's growing over a 30-year period, you could grow a $1.5 million asset base, a portfolio base. And if they both compound at 10%, after like in that first year, that $1 million is now 1.1, whereas the other one is 1. You got 150, 1.115. So there's 50 grand in alpha just by going down that path, and then that's kind of what you're saying, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Like you go and buy $1 million home and wait 10 years versus buying a 500K home and then 5 years later buying a 500K investment property. You're going to be in a better position by spending $1 million, splitting it up over a 5-year period. In 10 years after buying a 500K home and a 500K property, your wealth is going to grow faster.
Yeah. Oh, I'd caveat that with, and this is why
typically
that's the power of information, and obviously a professional as well. You got to buy the right asset in the right location.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's a big caveat there. You got to buy the right asset, but like, say you buy $1 million home on the Gold Coast versus buying a 500K home maybe on the Tweed Coast, and then another 500K property in 5 years' time, say in a high growth location anywhere in Australia. Like you're going to get, like you've spoken about this before, a 500K home is typically going to grow faster than $1 million. A 500K property is typically going to grow faster than $1 million property because there's more demand for a 500K property. Because it's cheaper.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, but yeah. There's so many what ifs, but like in my eyes, you pick it apart. You're like, 500K property and whoop wouldn't grow as fast as $1 million on the Gold Coast. Yeah, I agree, but
true.
I don't play in whoop region. I play in high growth locations. So there's that. But yeah, it's even for the $1 million, right? Like from an investment perspective, another example. You can go into a growth location or a good location for $1 million. The yield never keeps up with like the rental growth that keeps up with the capital appreciation. So $1 million property generally would be a 3% yield or a 3.5% yield. So you're getting slightly less cash flow. Whereas if you had split it up, had two 500s, you're getting that slight alpha in cash flow, which then leads to that slight increase in potential borrowing capacity, so you can hold a larger asset base that can compound over time. So it always depends on your risk profile as well, and sort of many different elements.
Another one I want to ask you about is the model number one, 500K home, and just keep it paid off over 30 years. Versus 500K home and then buy another investment property, or buy investment property in 5 years and another investment property 5 years later. With that, are you only using equity out of the 500K property, the one just before it, and then the 500K property as your second one? Or is it, so just for people thinking about like, well, do I need to save more money? Do I need to be more skimp in my everyday life to be able to put money away for a deposit? Or is it literally the equity and the properties doing the work for you?
Yeah, great question. And it's pulling, maybe it's a loaded question from you, mate, but yeah, you're pulling equity out. So it's not putting more of your personal cash in. What I would say though is with each property that you're purchasing, you've got to be factoring in sort of a 5 to 10, probably more of a 10K per year cash flow drain until it switches to a more until you're obviously your rents increase at a certain pace where you're paying less. But that, and there's initial few years you'll see about $10,000 drain on household cash flow, which is important to note. And that's roughly $200 a week. So it's kind of
you're
like
pulling equity out, and you've got a little bit more debt. You're just transferring debt to a deposit, really. But 200K, 10 grand a year. Yeah, so there's that to factor in.
Per property, FYI.
Per property,
and that's why
correct.
I staged it out over a 5-year period, because you get the rent increases, and then obviously the biggest thing for people is understand your household cash flow position and think forward a couple of years, because things obviously can change pretty dramatically. You don't want to be, in my eyes, like the smallest hold period for property should be 4 years. Now, I know you're loving listening to our voices, but there's some really key numbers that we're pretty excited to present. However, we need to break this one up into this is the end of part 1, and looking forward to part 2, aren't we, Jaryd?
Yeah, part 2, we're going to share where your net position would be if you ran this strategy of investing in a PPOR over 30 years, paying it down, versus buying 3 properties over a 30-year period. And we talk about debt, inflation. We talk about so many things about where it can net you at the end of your retirement, if you're starting when you're 30 or 40 and finishing when you're 60 or 70. There's so much value in part 2, so stay tuned.